To the Point with Michael Williams.
8 weeks until voters go to the polls. 8 weeks for candidates to make their final pitches in the most crowded congressional race in our area. Good morning and welcome. Of the 6 Republicans running in the primary to take on Congressman Patrick Murphy in Congressional District 18, the one with the highest name recognition is our guest today. Carl Domino served in the Florida State Legislature from 2002 to 2010, leaving because of term limits. Since then, he did run unsuccessfully for the State Senate and State House. Welcome, sir. Thank you for being our guest.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's see. You're not too busy. You've got 2 beautiful teenage children. At age 70, you just went to law school at Nova Southeastern and are now studying for the bar exam, correct?
Yes, I am.
And on top of that, you run a financial services firm with assets of about how much?
About $300 million under management.
And before that, a career retired Navy commander, did supply work, including a tour in Vietnam.
We truly live the American dream. We've had great opportunities, and we've done pretty well at them.
And some would say, with all of that at 70, why run for Congress?
Well, the truth is, I'm a big patriot, you know, having been in the military, and I think we've got a difficult environment. I think my skill set, particularly in job creation, things like that, tax issues, are things I can bring a fresh view
to Congress.
Talk about
when you say difficult environment, describe your chief concerns.
Well, just earlier this week, it was announced that our gross domestic product dropped by 3%. That's the lowest rate of growth, negative growth, in a non-recession in 58 years. We've got unemployment right now with discouraged people of over 12%. We've got a participation rate that's as low as it's been since the Jimmy Carter years. For the last 3 months, the average wage after inflation has gone down, and yet prices of food and other energy costs, the average middle-class person is in a squeeze. And I would hope to articulate pro-growth opportunities so that we can move everyone ahead.
You talk on your website a lot about job creation, saying it's your #1 priority. Amplify when you talk about being pro-growth. I mean, that's as basic a Republican plank as you can get. What specifically are you talking about? What could you do as a first-term congressman that's going to be different than what's been tried and in this polarized Congress rejected, especially when, among other things, many in the business community worry that Republicans are feeding on the young there and are anti-business in some respects. There's been that complaint on the Hill of late.
Well, I think the divide between the parties is very simple conceptually. Democrats believe, look at the pie and let's divide it as many ways we can. Republicans believe in growing the pie. And I think there's very specific, you ask for specific things. We need to approve the Keystone Pipeline. That would probably create about 42,000 jobs.
The Canada to Texas pipeline.
Absolutely. It not only would create 42,000 jobs, Michael, but it would move us towards energy independence.
But bring it home to the constituents in District 18. What are you going to do for job creation there?
They would definitely benefit by lower energy prices. Secondly, we need to have a tax holiday of some sort on the over $2 trillion that needs to be repatriated. That would help our district because A, either capital investment would be made locally, or B, people would have more income. Thirdly, we need to get rid of some of the red tape and regulations hurting the small business. Go out and talk to the small business person, and it's just one thing they've got to do after another. No one of which is that awesome, but when you take them in combination, now you've got to hire an accountant, you've got to hire a lawyer, and then, of course, Obamacare, even by the government, is acknowledged to keep 2 million jobs from being created. So there's much that can be done.
Because firms, in your estimation and that of many Republicans, don't want to bring on employees, want to stay beneath the cap at which they're hit with.
Well, it makes sense. If you're going to get penalized to get to 50, if you got 47, you're going to hire 3 more people.
We want to talk more about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare as you call it. Let's go back to job creation. You talk a lot about cutting taxes. There are others in the business community who say, listen, cutting marginal tax rates is not going to create jobs. What we need is a spending plan, fiscal policy that's sound, both on cutting spending and also raising taxes. Do you agree with that prescription?
Well, we need to do both.
We do need to raise taxes.
No, we need to cut taxes and cut spending. And the evidence through many cycles is when you've reduced marginal taxes, we've created growth. I mean, it did not start just with Ronald Reagan's supply side. I remember as a youth being a supporter of Jack Kennedy, who said, a rising tide raises all boats. I believe that we need to make the tax system more fair. For example, there's major corporations paying no tax. That's wrong.
We cut taxes a great deal in the early 2000s in the middle of a war under Republican leadership and a Republican president, and we ended up doubling the national debt, and that's been accelerated now in a Democratic administration. Many would argue same old recipe, it's going to be the same result, and that it's the pro forma Republican and in fairness, Democratic point of view. On the one hand, Republicans say cut taxes, and say look where that got us, and Democrats are opposed to spending cuts, and that it's the same thing going on and the same circular debate on both sides.
Well, but it's not. In 1963, Kennedy cut taxes, and we had almost the rest of the decade of growth. When Reagan came in, he cut taxes, and we had almost 20 years. You got to remember, when George W. came in, there was a recession going on. In 2000, there was a recession going on, and then we had the issue with Iraq. Until the financial markets hit the skid in 2008, and then after Lehman went bankrupt in September, the economy was growing and jobs were being created.
But
I think there's very little evidence.
But the very debt that you complain about, the national debt was doubling in that time frame.
Well, it was increasing, and it will always increase when you have a war. That's a major impact. The fact is, debt right now, as a percentage of gross domestic product, is unusually high. It's higher. The only other times it's been higher is during war. And here's the other thing about Michael. It's very important to remember this: $17 trillion of debt at the lowest interest rates we've had in 30 or 40 years. When those interest rates go up, as inevitably they will, just servicing that debt by the federal government for every point is $170 billion. That is 5% of what we spent.
Democrats and Republicans seem more interested in debt when it's the other piling it on. There always seems to be a reason why the debt they pile on is good debt, but if Democrats say the Republicans it's awful, and vice versa. Again, when you look at record low congressional approval ratings, isn't it saying that we need people to break out of this mold, that cutting taxes is the only answer, spending? Many economists argue the only way this nation's going to move forward is by tackling social programs like Social Security and Medicare, which Democrats don't want to touch, and many Republicans don't either, and that Republicans are going to have to accept that we're going to have to look at raising taxes in this country, doing both to make sense. And you've already taken raising taxes off the table.
Yeah, well, there's other things to be done. In each of those programs, there's a whole thing, plethora of things you can look at, changing the eligibilities, et cetera. But
would you raise the age limit for Social Security?
What you do on any of those things is you look at the combination of it. People, when Social Security came in to being, the average age was about 45. Now people are living 78. I am working at 70. So I think that's one thing you have to look at.
Raising the eligibility age for retirement.
That is one thing I would look at.
You'd be willing to look at that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know that to many Republicans that's a rail you don't touch, but you're saying you're willing to go there.
You have to do something, because it would be a great tragedy if 20 years from now we didn't have money for Social Security, we didn't have money for Medicare.
Let's talk specifically again. Let's bring it back to the Treasure Coast. Obamacare, as you call it, the Affordable Care Act, his supporters call it. We've heard the complaints. Specifically, what would you do to change it? Well, for your constituents on the Treasure Coast.
First of all, remember this. When it was passed, we were told several things. There are no taxes involved. Mm-hmm. You could keep your doctor. It was going to lower cost $2,500. You could insure. None of those have been true. I just finished law school, as you mentioned. When you induce a contract through material misrepresentations, you should rescind that.
What would you do differently?
We should do the things that will help the health care. First of all, you don't help health care by taking money away from those that are developing health. So what would you do? You could make insurance national-wide, health insurance. You could look at savings account.
Make insurance national?
Yeah, the health insurance is state by state right now. You could that would create
interstate competition.
Yes, make a more creative thing. You could allow for individual health savings account. You can do certain things that were in the bill, but in a different way. For example, pre-existing conditions. There are things you can do without, I mean, this was a 2,700-page bill that even Nancy Pelosi said no one had read. Let's read the bill now, because all the surprises that are coming out are wrong, and all the thing we're told about that has turned out not to be true.
A few minutes left, very briefly on the toxic water crisis that's so beleaguered the Treasure Coast. What do you do to help address that problem. That's been a contentious issue. It will remain one, and many argue there's not a lot that can be done. Very briefly on that, we want to talk about All Aboard Florida.
Well, on the water issues, Senator Negro has gotten $230 million to deal with on the state level. When I was in there, we got a lot of money for that, and one of the part of that money is to try to understand exactly the nature of the cause of the problem. I spent time with professors and stuff, and this has not always been an issue. So we need to identify the problem, then we need state and federal cooperation to take whatever measures need to be taken. And once again, there's a wide variety of things. We have ways of flowing water south. We have ways of measuring what releases you take from the dikes. But it's a federal issue, and it's one that should be given great attention to.
All Aboard Florida, everybody taking sides. Senator Negron says he's going to try and block any state and federal money that might come to the project. You're against All Aboard Florida. You're a businessman. Many argue it can make a big difference. And I hear many on the Treasure Coast saying, listen, it might be more palatable if we had a stop for All Aboard Florida on the Treasure Coast. If there was a stop for it on the Treasure Coast, would you support it?
Michael, 5 years ago, I fought Digital Domain because I did a financial analysis. Now, I can't do the same one about AAF because they won't release the numbers. But it doesn't stand to reason that this so-called private deal, a company that now has raised, I think, $400 million at 12%, needs to the government for $1.5 billion. This is our money. I don't think it makes any sense. It doesn't make any sense anywhere in the world. But part of my issue is the lack of transparency. Let us know where the ridership estimates come. Let us know what the cost of a ticket is. But $1.5 billion, we've got $17 trillion of debt. So this is not a private thing. This is a federal issue and one that I'm prepared to fight.
Carl Domino, running for Congress, Republican, Congressional District 18, in between raising those teenage kids and working on that bar exam. Busy man indeed. We'll be seeing much more of you as we head toward primary day. It'll be here before we know it.
Looking forward to it, and thanks for your time.
Thank you for your time, sir. Coming up next, we know about the Republicans and Democrats in the congressional race, but what role might independents play when it comes to tilting the tables? That coming up next in our roundtable. We have a new addition to our roundtable today. Isadora Rangel, the newly minted political reporter with Scripps Treasure Coast newspapers and tcpalm.com. A month and a half on that beat.
A month and a half, yes.
But with the papers
since 2011, I covered the city of Port St. Lucie.
Right. And Brian Crowley, nobody would accuse him of being newly minted. He ages like a fine wine. CrowleyPoliticalReport.com, my old buddy here. Isadora, let's begin with you, and thank you for being our guest here. We appreciate it. Out and about, we were talking about Congressional District 18. What's the sense you have of Republican voter interest, the crowds? What's the vibe there in a crowded field?
Well, if you compare it to 2012 when Ellen West was running, I think you don't see the same interest.
Right.
Was actually talking to one of the campaign managers a couple of days ago, and he was telling me that they pretty much just show up where voters are going to be, because I think we have a pretty crowded primary with 6 candidates. I think a lot of them are still struggling in getting name recognition, so they really want to go to voters instead of waiting for voters to come to them.
Hey, Brian, we talked last week about the fact that the national Republicans, Republican National Committee, is really not looking at this race right now and saying we're going to throw a lot of money toward that. Some kind of barometer, perhaps, of what they see as interest or disinterest, or the chance to capture that seat from Patrick Murphy, the Democrat.
Well, it's not helpful for the Republicans that there's 6 people in this race. You know, it would appear at this point that Carl Domino is in the lead of this
presumptive front runner. You'd agree with that as well?
I agree with it. And I've actually asked the other candidates to say Domino is the candidate
the man to beat.
Yes.
And you know, if he wins handily, and if something happens to Patrick Murphy between now and November, it's possible the NRCC will come back. But you know, they're looking at a limited number of races. They have a limited amount of money, and they're going to spend it where they think they'd be most effective for them.
Post-August, they say how it shapes up, what it looks like, and then decide whether to throw in. You recently did a story on independents in the congressional district, and talk about how you see that playing a factor come November as this race shapes up. It was awfully tight in 2012. We expect to see the same. It could be tilted very easily.
This is what I heard from Patrick Murphy's chief of staff and campaign advisor. Whoever wins the independent vote wins the election. We have roughly, I think, 37% Republicans in District 18, 36% Democrats, and 27% independents. So they're really able to swing the election either way. So that their vote is going to be very crucial.
For both of you, what is your sense of presidential coattails here? We hear so much. Every Republican candidate I've talked to not surprisingly, talks about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare as they talk about it, have come and talked to me, many of them, about immigration and like. Clearly, they're pinning their hopes on disaffection or dissatisfaction with Congress and with the president. How do you see that playing out when it comes grassroots to a local congressional race this fall?
Well, a lot of times it's just timing. If I'm Patrick Murphy or a lot of other Democratic candidates, I'm probably very happy that Iraq is not happening in November. This would probably have been a very unpleasant couple of weeks for Democrats where the president looks weak in the eyes of a lot of folks. You know, the president's numbers are lower than they've been since his election the first time. I think any Democrats, and this would include Charlie Crist, who's running for governor, they probably were hoping a year and a half ago that they'd have a much more popular president on their hands, and that doesn't look like that's going to happen.
What's your sense of the translatability of what people feel about the big national issues in this local congressional race?
I think if people are dissatisfied with the federal government, I think it's likely that more Republicans will turn out. I think that might be an issue for Democrats.
And chief local issue that you think will drive people to the polls this fall? They talk so much about issues. All issues ultimately are local, including health care and all of that. But when you look at grassroots issues, whether it be all aboard Florida, whether it be the water crisis, what do you think is going to be the main local driver for people? What's the sense?
I think the Indian River Lagoon is a big issue, and Murphy has done extremely well in positioning himself as a lagoon advocate. He sent letters to federal agencies, sent letters to the president trying to get funding for the C-44 canal in Martin County. So he has made it his issue, and I think it's going to be really hard for any of the candidates to really say Patrick Murphy hasn't done anything for the lagoon.
It's an excellent point, although Republicans as well can hang on to the governor's coattails to some extent, who has done more than some expected in terms of trying to put together pieces of Everglades restoration, including raising the Tamiami Trail, state money. He can argue the feds aren't doing their share, the state is. So that's going to be very interesting how that plays
Governor
out.
Scott has done a number of interesting two-steps, and the Indian River Lagoon is one of them. When he first got involved in it, he didn't pay much attention to it and had a very disruptive event. And now he seems to have waded in pretty strongly into providing the funding and the other things. And you have to give Senator Joe Negron a lot of the credit for that. You know, one of the things I love about politics, and I say this all the time, is that there's always surprises. Had we been sitting at this table 6 months ago and said, do we think a high-speed rail going through the Treasure Coast would have some impact on congressional races? We would have laughed. But, you know, people are up in arms, and most of those folks, as Isadora certainly knows, are completely in that district, and they're going crazy over the idea of this high-speed rail going through there. So it's one of those surprise issues that you don't plan for 6 months ago.
Politics, always interesting.
And I think Murphy has set the tone because he sent a letter to the Federal Railroad Administration asking for more information about this $1.5 billion loan. I think the other candidates are following his lead
on that.
Yes.
Let me ask you one more topic. You talked to Alan West recently,
yes,
Isadora, the former congressman, as you at home all well know, who lost in the congressional district 2 years ago after a contentious race that had every bit of national attention. What did he say about his plans?
Well, I think Alan West has made a career out of being Alan West, and I think he does it very well. He is considering running for president and perhaps the U.S. Senate, but I think he has made a career out of his speaking engagements. He has a PAC that has raised over $3 million. He wrote a book. He's a Fox News commentator. I think even if he doesn't run for office, and I think Brian pointed that out to me, he is going to be making money off of just being Alan West.
And wants to be, if not the kingmaker, certainly in the court, helping drive people's thoughts and feelings and perceptions, much like the Palin factor, Sarah Palin.
Well, yeah, but you know, Sarah Palin came down into a congressional race on the west coast of Florida, weighed in, and she lost. You know, I think some of these people are. Are you saying
he has no political punch left?
Very little. I think among those folks who are ardent, hardcore, hard conservative Republicans, he's preaching to the choir. I don't think he converts anybody to anything.
Back in a moment. We appreciate the input from both of you. Back in just a second. Closing comments, and because I love alliteration, we'll call it the Rangel Reflections. Go ahead.
Well, we have 4 millionaires running for state seats on the Treasure Coast, and they're all minorities. Very interesting. The wealthiest one, who's Representative Larry Lee, is worth $2.4 million, is African American. The 3 other ones are women. And Larry Lee actually is a son of farm workers from Fort Pierce. He owns an insurance agency today. So very interesting fact about this.
Thank you very much.
Clearly journalism has not been the correct field.
No.
And you, the Crowley closer.
Well, a couple of interesting things last week as we entered the close of the week. Charlie Crist, the Democratic candidate for governor, filed a friend of the court brief for the gay marriage lawsuit that's going on, which certainly suggests that he intends to bring gay marriage very much to the forefront of the governor's race against Rick Scott, should he be running against Rick Scott. And a Quinnipiac poll in Iowa had Jeb Bush coming in last, and some political commentators are beginning to suggest that perhaps Jeb Bush is done.
Well, as you said, we didn't know about all aboard Florida and the impact on local races then. We'll not figure out 2016 and 14, even though you and I have fun doing
That's
it.
right.
And now a new addition to help ruminate on all of that. Thank you both, Isadora Rangel. Appreciate you being our guest. We expect you back. You, I know, will be back. Thank you for spending time with us on today's To The Point. If you'd like to send a comment about today's broadcast, please go to WPTV.com and click on the To The Point page. As always, wishing you and yours a great day and a great week.